The view from the flagship judgment of Korlath was, as always, a lesson in imperial order. Stars were not random points of light here. They were categorized, charted, and subdued. Admiral Drox let his primary eyes linger on the tactical hologram floating above the command pit. The blue-white marble of the target world, designated T-3871G, or Earth, by its inhabitants, spun in serene ignorance, a Class 3 pre-imperial species. The scan data was almost boring in its predictability. Multiple competing political factions? Check. A recent history littered with global conflicts? Check. Energy signatures showing primitive fission power and early-stage orbital infrastructure? Check. They were children, screaming in their planetary cradle. The Galactic Empire had absorbed 10,000 such cradles over the millennia. This would be no different. The pacification fleet holds position at the system's edge, Admiral, intoned First Officer Vel. Her voice was a monotone, perfected by generations of selective breeding for obedience. The diplomatic enforcement vessel Edict has achieved high orbit around the planet's single moon. They await your command to transmit the standard ultimatum. Drox clicked a mandible in approval. Protocol was the foundation of the Empire. First, the single ship, a display of overwhelming individual technological superiority. Then, the ultimatum stating the inevitable. Finally, the revelation of the main fleet, a celestial hammer to shatter any residual defiance. It was a dance that never changed because it never needed to. Efficiency bred peace. Uniformity bred stability. Open a channel to the Edict, Drox commanded. Patch it to the primary human communication networks. Let them see the face of their future. On Earth, the signal was not so much received as it was imposed. It overrode major broadcast frequencies, satellite feeds, and even some digital billboards. One moment, there were pictures of news anchors, weather maps, and entertainment shows. The next, there was the visage of Admiral Drox. His face was a study in chitinous austerity, his four eyes arranged in a stern vertical line. He spoke in the guttural tones of Imperial Common, but sophisticated translation algorithms provided a cold, mechanical voiceover in Earth's major languages. People of Earth, I am Admiral Drox of the Galactic Empire's 7th Pacification Fleet. Your species has been assessed. You are found to be fractious, primitive, and perilously naive. Your history is a litany of errors. Your future, however, is now clear. In a secure operations center buried deep under the Korean peninsula, Lee Jun watched the feed. He was young for his posting as a senior diplomatic liaison to the United Earth Directorate, but his calm under the unbelievable pressure of the last week had marked him. He did not flinch at the alien's words. He took notes. The Galactic Empire brings order, Drox continued, the image of Earth floating beside his head. We bring an end to your conflicts, a purpose to your striving, and a place in the grand, eternal hierarchy. Resistance is illogical. Your weapons are sparks against our shields. Your ships are dust in our wake. You have one standard galactic cycle to formally surrender your planetary governance to the Imperial Regent who will arrive with our main fleet. Prepare your leaders. Prepare your data. Submit. The transmission ended, cutting back to a confused news anchor mid-sentence. On the judgment of Korlath, Drox felt a ripple of satisfaction. The script was proceeding. He expected the next communication from the humans to be a panicked, garbled request for clarification, or perhaps the hysterical defiance of a single nation-state, a defiance he would gladly make an example of. What came instead was a clean, narrowband transmission from the lunar surface routed to the Edict. The visual was of a human male sitting at a simple desk. He had dark hair and wore a neat, dark suit. His expression was not one of terror or anger, but of focused politeness. Admiral Drox, on behalf of the United Earth Directorate, I acknowledge your transmission. I am Liaison Lee Jun. We have received your invitation to parley. The scale of this moment is not lost on us. You have requested our formal surrender. Earth's governance is complex, a product of our independent histories. To provide a cohesive answer, we respectfully request time to consult with our planetary governing bodies. We propose a continuing dialogue to discuss the terms and implications of your offer. June's voice was even. His words were chosen not to provoke, but to delay. It was the oldest diplomatic trick in the book. Ask for time on his flagship. Drox felt a flicker of annoyance. This was not the screaming or the groveling he was used to. This human was procedural. He mistook it for a cleverly masked fear. They were stalling, hoping for a miracle that would not come. He decided to crush that hope immediately. Your complexity is a weakness, not a virtue, Drox broadcast back, his image reappearing on Li Jun's screen. Your request for consultation is noted. You have 1 galactic cycle, 10 of your planetary rotations, to provide your unified surrender. Use the time wisely. Do not mistake our patience for uncertainty. The main body of the 7th Pacification Fleet is already in transit. When it arrives in your sky, the time for discussion will be over. You will look up and understand the true meaning of power. The transmission ends. The screen went dark in the underground bunker. Li Jun let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Around him, the other members of the emergency council looked shell-shocked. He gave us 10 days, someone whispered. He also told us his main fleet isn't here yet, Jun said, standing up. His mind was already racing past the fear. The Admiral had revealed 2 crucial things without realizing it. An unshakable arrogance in his own process and a tactical timetable. 10 days. It wasn't much, but it was a window. It was all they had. He turned to the room. We need to get to work. We need to understand everything about the people who just called us primitive. Not just their ships, their culture, their history, what they value, what they fear. Start with that transmission. Analyze every pixel. The answer isn't in our guns. It's in them. High above, Admiral Drox surveyed his flawless fleet. The humans were scrambling now, he was sure. Let them have their 10 days of panic. It would make their surrender all the more sweet. The Empire did not adapt. The Empire was, and soon Earth would be too. The room was silent except for the low hum of servers and the soft click of keys. It was a different kind of bunker, not for soldiers but for scholars. Walls that were once bare concrete were now covered with floating holographic images, strange alien symbols, and waveform analyses of guttural speech. This was the Xenocultural Analysis Division, and Kim Yuna was at its heart. She stood before a massive main screen, her eyes tired but sharp. On it played the recorded message from Admiral Drox on a loop. But Yuna was not listening to the translation. She was listening to the raw Imperial Common. Her team had worked for 36 straight hours since the ultimatum. Again, Yuna said, her voice quiet. Play the section on hierarchy and purpose. The audio played. Drox's voice was a flat, resonant drone. A junior analyst, Park Ji-hoon, shook his head. The translation is accurate, Chief. He's talking about order and peace through submission. I'm not interested in the dictionary meaning, Ji-hoon, Yuna replied, not turning from the screen. I'm interested in the music he isn't playing. Listen to the cadence. It's not just a speech. It's a recitation. There is zero emotional variance. He might as well be reading a technical manual on waste processing. She zoomed in on Drox's face. Look at his eyes. All 4 of them. They don't move independently. They track as one unit. There's no glancing away, no subtle flicker of doubt or pride. It's like he's wearing a mask, but the mask is his face. She turned to her team. We are not dealing with individuals. We are dealing with a finished product. 100 generations of selective breeding for obedience has not just made them loyal. It has made them predictable. It has made them bored. Bored? Asked another analyst. Think about it, Yuna said, pacing. They have had a galactic empire for millennia. Stable. Uniform. What does that leave for the average citizen? Where is the art? Where is the rebellion? Where is the surprise? In all their transmissions, we've seen no evidence of personal expression. Their ship designs are identical, functional, and ugly. Their language is efficient and without wordplay. This is a civilization that solved all its big problems 10,000 years ago and has been running on the same software ever since. They are deeply, profoundly bored. Her theory sent a ripple through the room. It was a terrifying and hopeful idea. Their enemy's greatest weakness might not be a physical one. We need to prove it, Una said. Scour every byte of data from their vessel's open signals. The background radiation of their culture. Look for anything that isn't an official report. The team dug deeper. They analyzed the low-power communication between the Edict and the distant fleet. They studied the incidental energy signatures. They found the equivalent of maintenance logs, duty rosters, and power allocation reports. It was all crushingly dull. Then Jehun found something. Chief, look at this. It's a fragment very old, buried in a redundant signal layer. It seems to be a piece of visual media. He put it on the main screen. It was grainy and short. It showed a stylized, simple animation of two geometric imperial figures performing a rigid, repetitive dance in a sterile-looking room. A repetitive, melodic chime played in the background. It lasted 12 seconds and then looped. The room stared. What is that? Someone asked. I think, Una said, a slow smile spreading across her face for the first time in days. That is their entertainment, or what passes for it. It's a children's cartoon, probably 1,000 years old. And it hasn't changed. The discovery was a key turning a lock. If their art was this stagnant, everything else would be too. The team's focus shifted from military analysis to cultural dissection. They built psychological profiles not of admirals but of the average imperial citizen. They lived in a universe without color, without narrative tension, without mystery. Their stories would be about upholding order. Their music would be about harmony and duty. Their food would be nutritious paste. Li Jun visited the bunker later that day, his face lined with stress. What do you have for me, Una? The military panels are screaming for target profiles. The engineers are begging for shield frequency guesses. Una gestured to the walls of analysis. We have a profile, June, but not the one they want. Their shields are probably impregnable. Their weapons are beyond ours. Fighting them is exactly what they expect. It's the only script they have. So we're supposed to just give them our surrender? June asked, frustration bleeding into his voice. No, Una said calmly. We give them something they don't expect. We give them a virus. June's eyes widened. A biological weapon? That's a war crime. And they'd detect it immediately. Not a biological virus, Una said. An idea. A cultural virus. They are an arid desert. We are going to give them a monsoon of ideas. Stories where the underdog wins not by being stronger, but by being clever. Music that makes you feel things you can't name. Food with textures and flavors that explode. Games where you can make choices. We show them the beautiful, chaotic, heartbreaking mess of being an individual. June was silent, absorbing the sheer scale of the plan. You want to attack their culture. I want to offer them a gift, Una corrected. A gift they are psychologically starving for. We can't beat their fleet, but we might just be able to confuse their souls. A bored soldier is a compliant soldier, but a soldier who suddenly wonders what if is no longer a soldier. He's a person, and the Empire doesn't seem to know what to do with persons. She pulled up the crude imperial cartoon again. They gave us 10 days. We won't build a warship in that time, but we can build the greatest care package in history, a Trojan horse of stories and songs. We make them curious, and curiosity is the first step to questioning an order. June looked from the sterile, looping animation to Una's determined face. The plan was insane. It was the only plan they had. He nodded slowly. Start building your package. I'll handle the directorate. We'll call it a gesture of goodwill and cultural exchange. A prelude to our surrender. As he left, Una turned back to her team. Start curating. Everything. From our greatest symphonies to our silliest pet videos. From epic films to simple poems. We are going to introduce the Galactic Empire to the human heart. Let's see if it can be conquered. The task was impossible, That was the first thing Park Miho thought when he got the secure call. He was a media archivist, a man who preferred the quiet of the past to the noise of the present. His world was one of restored film reels, digitized vinyl records, and the careful cataloging of century-old television broadcasts. He lived in a small apartment in Seoul, its walls lined with hard drives containing more human culture than any museum. Now, a man named Lee Jun was on his screen, telling him the fate of the world depended on his particular obsession. "They want a cultural package, Miho," Jun had said, his face grim on the video feed. "Everything. The good, the bad, the beautiful, the strange. In 9 days. Can you do it?" Miho had simply blinked, his mind already scrolling through petabytes of data. "Define everything," he had replied quietly. Now, he sat in a temporary command center that had been built, ironically, in the basement of a major film studio. He was no general, but he had been given generals to command. Teams of programmers, linguists, historians, and artists were waiting for his direction. The weight of it was paralyzing that a young woman, Choi Yoonji, approached his cluttered desk. She was a narrative psychologist assigned to his team. "Sir, the parameters? Do we focus on our greatest artistic achievements? Show them our nobility? Beethoven, Da Vinci, the great epics?" Miho shook his head slowly. He was thinking like a curator, not a propagandist. "No. That's a performance. That's what you show a visiting king. We are not performing. We are infecting." He stood up and addressed the room. His voice was soft, so they had to quiet down to hear him. "Forget making them respect us. We need to make them feel something. Confusion, joy, sadness, laughter. Things their perfect, orderly world has likely bred out of them." He pointed to a screen. "We need contrast. Pair a soaring symphony with a child's first, clumsy piano lesson. Follow a grand historical drama about war with a simple, silent film about a man trying to catch a train. Show them our heroism, then immediately show our ridiculousness. A cooking show for a perfect cake, then a video of a cat knocking a glass off a table." Yoonji frowned. "Won't that seem chaotic and weak?" "That's exactly what we are," Miho said. "And it is our strength. They have had no chaos for millennia. Chaos is new. Chaos is interesting. Start with narrative. We need stories, not just the ones where the hero wins. We need stories where the hero fails. Stories where the villain has a point. Stories about rebellion, yes, but also stories about quiet love and growing old. Transmit entire series, untranslated, but with subtitles in their language. Let them work for the meaning." The room burst into activity. It became a global project. Film studios unlocked their deepest archives. Streaming companies opened their entire libraries. Museums scanned artworks. Grandmothers were interviewed for family recipes. Street musicians had their recordings uploaded. Video game developers sent open-world games where you could ignore the main quest and just fish. Miho's desk was the eye of the hurricane. He reviewed Snippets, a classic Korean drama about a fraught family reunion, a Bollywood musical with explosive color and dance, a bleak Scandinavian detective story, an American cartoon about a talking sponge. He approved them all. He specifically requested raw, unedited footage. A baby's first steps, a crowded, chaotic market street, protest march, peaceful forest, the silence of snow falling, the roar of a sports stadium. "Sir, we're including war documentaries," a historian said, worried. "And our crimes, the darker chapters. Won't that give them reason to conquer us?" Miho thought of the cold, perfect face of Admiral Drox. "They already think they have reason. We show them the truth, the whole truth. We are not a perfect species offering ourselves for improvement. We are a flawed, struggling, living one. Show them the Holocaust Museum. Show them the monuments to famine. Then show them the people planting trees, cleaning beaches, volunteering at shelters. Show them the contradiction. That is what being human is." As the days ticked down, the package became less a diplomatic offering and more a vast, living portrait of Earth. It was not a weapon. It was a mirror, and a window. On the final day, June visited. The digital package was ready, a compressed but massive file containing millions of hours of content. A whole civilization's noise and heartbreak and joy. "It's ready," Miho said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. He looked exhausted but calm. "It's not a shield. It's not a bomb. What is it?" June asked, looking at the progress bar on the main screen, reading the label Earthvox. Miho allowed himself a small, weary smile. "It's a question. We are sending them a question, wrapped in 10,000 different stories. The question is this all there is?" Their entire society is built on the answer yes. We are going to ask them in a trillion different ways. What if the answer is no? June stared at the screen. The plan was still insane. They were about to respond to a galactic ultimatum with movies and music and video games, with recipes and wedding videos and grainy footage of parades. "Do it," June said. A technician pressed a key. The data package, labeled as a gestural precedent of cultural harmonization, began its transmission from a lunar array directly to the Imperial ship, the Edict. It was a gift freely given. A show of goodwill. In his quarters aboard the Judgment of Korlath, Admiral Drox received a notification. The humans had sent a communication. It was not their surrender. It was a data dump of enormous size. He scanned the summary. Cultural artifacts. He felt a wave of contempt. This was their answer? Sentimental nonsense. Primitive noise. It was a delaying tactic, a final, futile effort to showcase their irrelevance. He almost deleted it, but protocol demanded all communications be logged. He ordered it shunted to the low-priority recreational archive, where it would be automatically processed and filed away, forgotten. Let them have their little gesture. Changed nothing. The fleet was only days away. He closed the report, the human gift already dismissed from his mind. Aboard the diplomatic enforcement vessel Edict, boredom was a physical presence, as constant as the hum of the engines. Low-rank communications officer Crix went through his duties with mechanical precision. Monitor the passive sensors. Log any stray human transmissions. Maintain the cultural quarantine buffer. It was the same cycle, shift after shift. The Empire did not believe in distracting its warriors with entertainment. Focus was a weapon. Boredom, his training sergeant had once said, was the ally of discipline. Crix believed this. He truly did. But in the long, quiet stretches between the official, terse updates from the approaching pacification fleet, his mind would wander. The view screen showed the blue planet below, swirling with unpredictable weather patterns. Seemed so messy, so undecided. He found it strangely hard to look away from Dot. On the third day after the human transmission arrived, a system notification blinked on his console. The massive human data packet, filed under miscellaneous non-essential / pre-imperial cultural output, had finished its automatic processing and decryption. The archival subroutine was prompting for a category tag. Part of Crix's job was to apply these tags. He opened the file index with a sigh, expecting primitive technical schematics or self-aggrandizing historical records. What he saw made his primary eyes narrow. The list was chaotic. Asterisk file. Symphony No. 5 in C minor, Beethoven. File. Street food preparation, tacos. File. Competitive sporting event, FIFA World Cup Final 2042. File. Animated narrative, My Neighbor Totoro. File. Text-based philosophical discourse, On the Absurd, Camus. Asterisk. It made no sense. What was the unifying principle? What was the learning objective? His mandible twitched with a rare curiosity. Protocol stated he should tag it all as irrelevant and let it be buried. But a small, quiet part of him, a part dulled by years of identical routine, wondered. The file labeled Animated Narrative was small. It would be an efficient way to assess the content's insignificance. He opened it. 20 minutes later, Crix realized he had not moved. The story was simple. Two young human children, their lives filled with a quiet anxiety, discover friendly forest spirits. There was no villain, no great battle, no lesson about duty to the state. It was about comfort, about the magic in quiet places, about the love for a sick mother. The art was soft, filled with vibrant greens and blues he never saw on Imperial ships. The music made his audio receptors feel strange. He closed the file, a feeling like guilt in his thorax. It was irrelevant. It was emotional propaganda. Yet, he tagged it not as irrelevant, but as anthropological narrative studies. This was his duty, after all, to understand the enemy. He opened another, at random. File, cinematic narrative, The Shawshank Redemption. It was longer. He told himself he would just sample it. He watched a man sentenced for a crime, living a life of brutal routine in a grim institution. He saw that man, over years, secretly carve a tunnel to freedom. The concept was illogical. The patience was unimaginable. The final scene, of the man standing free in the rain, made Crix's breathing vents tighten. He had to stop the video. He looked around the comms pit. The others were at their stations, silent. The boredom hung heavier than ever. With a swift, decisive motion, he did something unprecedented. He took a small, non-critical data slug, copied a few of the smaller human files onto it, the forest spirit tale, a short piece called Charlie Chaplin, the lion's cage, a collection of images called Cats Failing to Jump, and slipped it into the sleeve of his uniform. That night, in the low-rank communal berth, the air was thick with the silence of minds with nothing to think about. Crix lay on his rest slab, the data slug hidden in his hand. He felt a pulse of what his species might have once called excitement. It was treasonous. It was also the most interesting thing he had done in years. He plugged the slug into his personal datapad, the screen shielded by his body. He watched the silent human with the small mustache get into a cage with a sleeping lion, and then panic when the lion wakes up. A sound escaped Crix, a short, sharp burst of air from his vents. It was a laugh. He had never heard himself make that sound. It was undignified. It was wonderful. The next day he was reckless. He left the data slug with its files on a console in the mess hall. He did not see who picked it up. But that evening, he heard two engineering apprentices in a corner, their heads close together, vents puffing quietly. They were watching the cats failing to jump. The contagion was slow, subtle, and unstoppable. It spread not through orders, but through whispers. A technician found a recipe for chocolate chip cookies and used the protein synthesizer in a forbidden, creative way. The resulting sweet, chewy discs were shared in a shadowy alcove. A junior pilot watched a drama about a human courtroom and spent his next shift wondering about the concept of reasonable doubt. By the time the mighty 7th Pacification Fleet arrived, gliding into the solar system like a wall of polished darkness, the crew of the Edict was no longer bored. They were confused, intrigued, and quietly humming strange, melodic tunes. They looked at their pristine, invincible fleet, and for the first time, some of them saw not glorious order, but a cold, gray sameness. They looked at the vibrant, messy planet below, and instead of seeing a target, they saw the place where the forest spirits lived, where the man stood free in the rain, where people made flat, sweet discs just for the joy of it. Admiral Drox, surveying his assembled might, felt a swell of pride. The humans would look up and know true power. He did not know that, on the ships below him, his warriors were no longer thinking of power. They were thinking of stories, and a story, once heard, cannot be unheard. The Imperial flagship Judgment of Korlath was a city of polished darkness floating in the void. To Admiral Drox, it was the pinnacle of 10,000 years of flawless logic. Every corridor was straight. Every surface gleamed. Every sound was the purposeful hum of machinery or the precise step of boots. It was perfection, and it was his as the fleet settled into its final positions around the human world. Drox felt a profound sense of rightness. The dance was concluding. Soon, the regent would descend to the planet and accept their formal surrender. The empire would grow by one more mediocre world, and history would continue, unchanged. The first report was a minor irritation. It came from the captain of the Edict. Minor fluctuations in crew focus metrics, Admiral. Possibly due to extended waiting period. Recommend increased drill intensity. Drox approved the drills. Discipline was the solution to restlessness. The second report was more puzzling. It came from the quartermaster corps of the battleship Resolute. Unsanctioned use of nutrient synthesizers on multiple vessels. Crews are generating non-standard, geometrically irregular, and chemically complex food items. Resources are being diverted. Drox scowled. He issued a general order. Nutrient synthesizers were to be locked to approved imperial dietary formulae. Creativity was not a nutrient, but the reports kept coming, each one a tiny crack in the immaculate surface. From the fleet cultural officer, detection of anomalous audio patterns on intraship low-band communications. Patterns do not match approved military or devotional frequencies. Analysis suggests melodic repetition. From the commander of the 4th Fighter Wing, pilots are exhibiting delayed response times in simulation. Debriefs show lapses in attention. One pilot asked about the artistic merit of different flight formations. Drox's anger began as a slow heat in his chest. This was not restlessness. This was contamination. He reviewed the logs and found the source, the massive data dump from the humans, the cultural gift he had dismissed. It had not been filed away. It had been accessed. It had spread. He acted with the full force of imperial law. A new priority order flashed to every ship in the fleet. Directive Alpha 0, cultural purification. All human data files were to be identified and purged. All personal data slugs were to be confiscated. Any crew member found possessing, discussing, or replicating human cultural concepts was to be reported for reindoctrination. For a day, the fleet was silent under the new order. Drox believed he had cauterized the wound. He did not understand the nature of the infection. You cannot unhear a song. You cannot unfeel an emotion. You cannot unask a question. On the judgment of Korlath itself, in a low-tier artisan bay, a young imperial named Lilith received the purge order. Her task was to paint identification markers on cargo containers, simple, approved glyphs in approved colors. Her world had always been one of strict visual rules. Until 3 days ago, she had accessed a human file titled Visual Art Movements, Impressionism to Abstract Expressionism. She had seen images where light was broken into dashes of color, where a night sky swirled with violent beauty, where shapes and colors expressed feeling without depicting a single real object. It had broken something open inside her. The perfect, sterile walls of her world had suddenly felt like a cage. The purge order demanded she delete the files from her station. She did, but the images were now inside her. They burned there. That night, instead of returning to her berth, she went back to the mostly empty artisan bay. Before her stood a large, blank section of corridor wall, recently repaired and not yet marked with the standard gray regulation paint. It was a perfect, blank canvas. Trembling, her manipulators unsteady, she did not reach for the gray. She took canisters of the standard issue colors used for cargo coding. A dull red, a functional blue, a cautionary yellow, a harsh black. They were ugly, utilitarian colors. But in her mind, they were the colors from the human images. She began to paint. Not a glyph, not a marker. She made a large, sweeping stroke of blue, then a clash of yellow against it. She let the shapes be clumsy. She let them bleed into each other. She painted not what she saw, but what she felt. The confusion, the wonder, the sudden, terrifying longing for a sky that swirled. It was not a picture of anything. It was a feeling, made visible on the wall of the flagship. When she finished, exhausted, her carapace splattered with paint, she stepped back. It was messy. It was irrational. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever created. She was still standing there when the Nightwatch patrol found her. They stared at the wall, their sensory palps quivering in distress. This was not order. This was chaos. This was a direct violation of Directive Alpha 0. Lilith was taken to the security holding cells. Her creation was reported directly to Admiral Drox. Drox arrived at the site, his 4 eyes taking in the blasphemous splash of color. His anger was now cold and absolute. This was the human virus manifest. It had turned a productive artisan into a vandal. It had defiled his ship that he had Lilith brought before the mural, her limbs restrained. You have violated the directives of purity. Drox's voice echoed in the corridor. You have introduced chaos. You will now erase this thing. Every mark. Then you will report for mine scrubbing and reassignment to deep mineral processing. The guards released her manipulators and handed her a solvent scrubber. The crew of the shift, summoned to witness the correction, watched in silence. Lilith looked at the scrubber. She looked at her painting. She thought of the human who stood in the rain, free. She thought of the forest spirits. She thought of the messy, blue planet below that made such things possible. Her voice, when it came, was small but clear in the silent hallway. It was the most subversive sentence ever uttered on the judgment of Korlath. No. The air seemed to vanish from the corridor. A collective shock washed over the assembled Imperials. Disobedience was unthinkable. Public refusal of a direct order from an admiral was existential. Drox took a step forward, his chitinous plates rattling. You will comply. Lilith dropped the scrubber. It clattered on the deck, the sound obscenely loud. She did not look at Drox. She looked at the other crew members, their faces a mask of confusion and, hidden deep, a flicker of something else. Oh, I will not, she said softly to them. It is mine. It is true. In that moment the war was won. Not with a shot but with a refusal. The Empire could handle rebellion. It could not handle a single quiet no from a lowly artisan who had seen color for the first time. That single word was a crack that ran through the foundation of 10,000 years of control. The humiliated empire stood not on the outside, but within its own perfect, breaking walls. The silence in the corridor was heavier than a black hole. Admiral Drox stared at the artisan, Lilith, who had just broken the universe. The word no hung in the air, vibrating with impossible energy. Around them, the gathered crew stood frozen, their training warring with the shocking new data their senses were reporting. Defiance existed. It had a face, and it was covered in paint. Drox's voice, when it finally came, was a low, dangerous hum. Seize her. Scrub the wall. Now. The security drones moved, but their motion was oddly slow, as if the human cultural virus had infected their programming with a moment of hesitation. As they took Lilith's arms, something else happened. A low-rank engineer near the back of the crowd, one who had secretly learned to make brownies from a human file, did not step forward to help. He took a single step back. It was a tiny movement. But in a society where everyone always stepped forward, a step back was a scream. On the bridge of the judgment of Korlath, Drox tried to reassert control, but the fleet was bleeding signals of dysfunction. Reports flooded in, not of mechanical failure, but of social collapse from the carrier might of core. A group of pilots has submitted a formal petition, using a layered rhetorical structure unfamiliar to Imperial law, requesting a review of the aesthetic monotony of fighter cockpit design. From the battleship Resolute, a coordinated work stoppage has occurred in the lower mess hall. Crew are demanding variety in nutrient-paste flavors. They have submitted recipes. From the edict itself, Communications Officer Crix has been detained. He was found broadcasting an unauthorized audio signal on a low band, a human musical piece called Bohemian Rhapsody. He claimed he was testing signal propagation. Drox felt the deck beneath him, once the firm foundation of absolute power, turned to sand. The enemy was not out there. The enemy was inside the mind of his fleet. He had no protocol for this. The Empire's playbook contained no chapter on how to fight a meme. When the formal request for a parley arrived from Earth, it was the final insult. It was not from a military commander. It was from the diplomatic liaison Li Jun. The message was polite, impossibly so. It expressed concern over the social disruptions being detected in the Imperial fleet and offered Earth's assistance in facilitating cross-cultural mediation to ease this period of adjustment. They were offering to help him run his own navy. Blind, rage-filled instinct demanded he vaporize the lunar transmission array. But a colder, more terrifying thought stopped him. What if his crews, now debating philosophy and humming tunes, did not obey the fire command? The shame would be eternal. He had to face this, directly, and reimpose reality. Arrange the meeting, he snarled at his stunned communications officer. On their lunar outpost. I will go myself. I will look this human in its eyes and make it understand the cost of its games. The meeting room in the human lunar base was nothing like an imperial chamber. It was softly lit, with real plants growing in the corners. The table was a smooth, warm wood. Li Jun stood calmly on one side. He wore a simple, dark suit. He did not look like someone who had broken a galactic empire. He looked like a man ready for a difficult business meeting. Admiral Drox entered, his armored form seeming too large, too harsh for the quiet space. 2 hulking Imperial guards flanked him, their weapons prominent. June merely gave a small, respectful nod. Admiral, thank you for coming. Please sit. Drox remained standing. You will rescind all cultural transmissions. You will order your species to cease all mental contamination of Imperial personnel. You will surrender now without condition. June listened patiently. When Drox finished, June gestured to a chair again. That is one option, a final, violent option. But we have observed significant distress in your fleet. We believe there is another path. Do not speak to me of paths, Drox hissed. You have unleashed a psychic weapon. A weapon, June said, his head tilting slightly. We sent you stories, songs, recipes. A weapon destroys. What we sent creates questions, creates feelings. Your people seem to have a hunger for it. You have made them weak, unreliable. Drox's voice echoed in the room. June's expression softened, not with pity, but with something more unsettling, understanding. Have we? Or have we shown them they were already in a cage they could not see? We did not build the cage, Admiral. Your empire did. He tapped a pad on the table. A hologram appeared between them. It showed data streams, social cohesion metrics from the Imperial fleet. All were in catastrophic decline. Then it showed snippets, Imperial crew members trying to dance, sketching on duty pads, arguing about the moral choices in a human video game. The infection, as you call it, is in the bloodstream of your fleet, June said quietly. You could try to purge it. You could arrest thousands. You could mind scrub your own people. Would that be strength? Or would it be the final confession that your perfect order is so fragile it can be destroyed by a cartoon and a chocolate chip cookie? Drox had no answer. The holographic evidence was his ultimate humiliation, displayed by his enemy. So here is our offer, June said, leaning forward slightly. We will not surrender, but we are willing to help. We have experts in social transition, therapists, artists, chef. We can send them as advisors to help your people process this new information, to help you manage the change, not with punishment, but with guidance. The offer hung in the air. It was not a treaty of surrender. It was a charitable offer of psychiatric and cultural aid to his crippled civilization. It was so generous, so utterly condescending, that Drox felt his entire body go numb with the sheer scale of the defeat. He, the admiral of the 7th Pacification Fleet, had not been beaten in battle. He had been diagnosed as the ruler of a sick society and offered a humanitarian handout. He turned without a word. He walked past his guards, out of the softly lit room, back into the sterile corridor of his shuttle. He had come to issue an ultimatum. He was leaving having been offered medical aid for a disease called humanity. The defeat was absolute. The humiliation was complete. He had nothing left to say. There was no grand battle in the sky. No fiery explosions lit up the darkness above Earth. The victory was quiet, and it happened in the silence between stars. On the bridge of the Judgment of Korlath, Admiral Drox sat in his command throne, a statue of defeat. The reports had stopped coming. He had stopped asking for them. He knew what they would say. The fleet was no longer a weapon. It was a hospital ward full of patients suffering from a beautiful, devastating sickness. To fire a single shot now would risk mutiny, not from a desire to fight him, but from a refusal to destroy the source of the strange new feelings they were exploring. He looked at the hologram of Earth, so bright and flawed. They had not even raised their shields. Their trust was the final, unbearable insult. A directive arrived from the Imperial Core. It was not addressed to him, but to the fleet's central computer. He was copied. His eyes scanned the cold, official text. Directive Omega-7. Quarantine Protocol. All vessels of the 7th Pacification Fleet were to immediately disengage from the T-3871G Earth system. A sector-wide quarantine was now in effect. The system was to be classified as a forbidden zone of chaotic resonance. No Imperial vessel was to approach. No communication was to be established. The species known as humanity was to be listed as a non-integrable existential hazard. The Empire was not surrendering. It was running away. It was putting a warning label on the human species and sealing them in a box. They were too dangerous to conquer, not because of their strength, but because of their ideas. The shame of it was absolute. The High Command had chosen to pretend humanity did not exist, rather than admit they could not control it. Drox gave the order. There was no resistance. Across the fleet, a strange mood settled. It was not the joy of warriors going home. It was the confusion of patients being removed from a clinic. As the massive ships turned, their engines glowing with silent power, many crew members looked back at the blue marble. They did not see a failed conquest. They saw the place where the stories came from. On Earth, in the Xenocultural Analysis Bunker, Kim Yuna watched the sensors. The Imperial fleet was leaving. Not in a tactical retreat, but in a slow, orderly withdrawal. It was over. There was no cheering. The room was quiet, filled with a kind of stunned disbelief. They had won. By sending movies and music and recipes, they had turned away the greatest power in the galaxy. Li Jun walked in, looking as tired as she felt. He stood beside her, watching the last of the Imperial signatures fade from the edge of the solar system. "They're calling it the miracle of Sol," he said quietly. "There are parades being planned." Yuna shook her head slowly. "It wasn't a miracle. It was a diagnosis. We showed them a mirror, and they saw a sickness in themselves they couldn't face. They didn't fear our guns. They feared our aliveness." Just then, a technician called out, her voice confused. "Incoming narrowband transmission. Origin, it's from the trailing Imperial vessel. The edict. It's not on an official channel. It's a raw data burst. Could be a weapon?" someone said. "No," Yuna said, a sudden certainty in her voice. "Put it on the main screen. Decode it." The screen flickered. What appeared was not text or a formal message. It was a flood of images, sounds, and text files. They were crude, messy, and breathtaking. There were drawings clearly done by Imperial manipulators trying to imitate human styles. A swirling starfield that looked like Van Gogh, a clumsy but heartfelt sketch of a human face. There were lines of Imperial script, but arranged in rhythmic patterns, poetry. There were audio files of simple, repetitive, but newly composed melodies. There were even attempts at recipes, combining Imperial nutrient base with wild guesses about human spices. And at the very front of the data burst was a single text file, its title translated by the computer. The first question. June looked at Yuna. "What does it mean?" Yuna stared at the cascading creativity on the screen. This first, fragile bloom from a desert that had been dry for 10,000 years. A slow smile spread across her face, not of triumph, but of profound wonder. "It's their answer," she whispered. "We sent them a question wrapped in our culture. Is this all there is? This is their no. They're sending it back to us." The Empire had stood defeated and humiliated, not by a force of arms, but by a force of mind. They had retreated to the safety of their silent, uniform darkness. But they had left something behind in their wake. Proof. The human spirit, that chaotic, beautiful, and relentless thing, was not just a trait. It was a catalyst. It had not conquered the Galactic Empire. It had, in the hearts of a few, started to set it free. The victory was not a territory taken, but a seed planted. And on the screen, in clumsy, beautiful strokes, that seed was already beginning to grow.